Hello, folks. This is Matthew, your host. We've got a great episode for you, but I wanted to make a quick announcement first. Forgive the cough there. That's kind of part of the point. I've gotten fairly sick recently. Might be COVID, might be something else, not sure. Testing's been weird. But between that and some other stuff, I'm going to be taking a brief hiatus, a kind of semi-hiatus with the podcasts for a little while. I have a couple episodes that I'm going to try and record when we can. But I'm going to kind of go on a bit of a looser schedule, do it when my voice is able to, when also kind of, some of the medications I'm taking, head's a little fuzzy, makes things a little harder. And of course, as the strike goes on, I've been doing my best to keep giving you good content, but I want to make sure that we're not just coming up with an episode just to have an episode. With the writer's strike ending, that is going to be changing some things, which one of the podcasts being released this week that you may be listening to right now on Superhero Ethics is definitely going to be addressing. And so that is going to open up some doors, but of course, with the actor strike still going on, I'm going to respect that picket line. So we're just going to be kind of taking a hiatus for a little while. There will still be some episodes coming out from time to time. I'm just not going to try and have them exactly on a weekly schedule. Please, though, if you've been a fan of this, I promise we're going to be coming back soon. Definitely some new episodes will be coming out. I've got some content in the works. We're just not going to be quite on a weekly schedule anymore for a couple weeks, maybe a month or two, while my health improves and also while we figure out what's happening with the strikes. And really hoping after the writer's strike that now the actor strike is going to come to an end soon. But we'll see what happens. I'll have more news for you, probably at least in a month or two. Hopefully by then we'll be back to a regular schedule. But if not, I'll give you some more news. But please just stay subscribed. I promise more content's coming soon. Thank you so much, and here's your episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Folks, as you know, if you've listened to anything I do, I have been 100% behind the strikes happening in Hollywood, as has all of the TruStory FM network that this podcast is a part of. Well, we all know that the WGA strike has come to an end, somewhat. There's a couple of bureaucratic steps to still go through, but looks like real progress has been made. And myself and Andy Nelson from the podcast network, who's been a frequent guest on this show, a screenwriter with a lot of information on this topic, are going to be talking about what is the strike, what does this deal that's been made mean, what are the next steps, what does this mean for SGA, and when can we go back to talking about all the stuff that's coming out the way I used to. So, Andy, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Yeah, this is Andy Nelson from TruStory FM, also host of The Next Reel, Marvel Movie Minute, which you've joined me on for a full season, which was an absolute blast, and Movies We Like, and just love working in podcasts and, getting stories out there.
Great. Well, I'm so glad you're here. Andy was present the last time we were dealing with some Hollywood labor issues, to talk about some of that stuff. And so I'm really glad to have you back. And let's just kind of start at the very beginning. All over the news, we've seen the headline of the WGA strike is over. What exactly happened?
Yeah, I mean, this has kind of been a long time coming, right? I mean, the last big strike of the WGA was in 2008. And they didn't have anyone else striking with them at the time. The fact that SAG-AFTRA ended up striking at the same time, I think helped. But also, I think society's shifted a little bit. But this was really a kind of a fight to get the system to change, because it really hasn't been changing. The AMPTP, or American Motion Picture Theater and television producers, I can't remember exactly what the acronym is, but they really have been always reticent to make these changes. Back when the last time there was a strike, the writers wanted more residuals coming from DVD and Blu-ray sales, and they were AMPTP was like, well, we're not sure, this might just be a something that's we don't know how it's going to actually affect things, so we don't feel comfortable giving any money from it. And of course, they ended up getting a lot of money from all of that. And now the same thing has happened with streaming. And again, the Producers Guild was pretty much telling them, we don't know this streaming thing. It could just be a flash in the pan. So let's just see how it goes. And it's been that way since it started. And finally, the writers were really pushing to get some changes with the deals related to streaming. And that became the kind of the critical point for them to want to get all of this changed. And then, of course, suddenly, right as the strike was starting to happen, all the conversation around AI and what what programs like ChatGPT could provide in the realm of writing, popped up in the news quite a bit and turned into something that they were like, you know what, we need to address this as well.
Yeah.
Along with a few other issues. But I mean, those were two of the big key issues that the writers really wanted to address.
Yeah, I think it's not that long ago, but it seems like it. 5-6 months ago, one of the big things we were discussing was all of the AIs that were creating art. And like that they were, were they stealing from artists? And which in many cases they clearly were, in terms of like they would often reproduce artist signatures and things like that. And I remember that conversation kind of getting, as you were saying, like all the AI conversations kind of wound up getting woven into this conversation about the strike. So what has happened now? What is the big news that we're all talking about?
Well, I mean, it has been this shift, and it's actually really interesting. The writers ended up, it ended up kind of being a perfect story of a David and Goliath. And I think a lot of it is the writers adapted to society and societal changes a lot faster than the Producers Guild did. And when you see all of these writers taking up on TikTok or the Instagram stories or other places, Twitter, wherever they happened to be having the conversation, they were really open and transparent, letting their anyone who is following them, letting them into this world of why things have been progressing the way they've been, why it's been so unfair, why writers' rooms are kind of a disaster right now, the way they're set up. And the Producers Guild never was able to kind of catch up with that. They really were playing by an old rule book. And, when you have people like Bob Iger being interviewed at, I can't remember what it's called, but that huge, mega money summit that they do up at some camp in Idaho every year. And he is just the way that he's approaching all of it and the way other producers would approach it as far as we're going to make them wait months until they're losing their houses. Like they're approaching it in a way that wasn't making the American public feel like, let's side with these producers because these writers are taking away our entertainment. Everybody ended up kind of siding with the writers, and nobody was feeling sad about these big corporate overlords that were running these studios. And so more and more people were favoring changes to support the writers. And so the Producers Guild ended up having to give in quite a bit. They didn't give out on everything, but still the writers walked away. The WGA was saying it was an exceptional deal. All of their minimums are getting increased over the next 3 years. Like every year they'll get an increase on their salaries. And again, the way that these work, it's a 3-year contract. So who knows? We may be going through all this again in 2026. But for now, at least we know they're going to be getting increases over the next 3 years. They're getting more contributions put into their health and pension, and for them, and when it's a writing team, they've had a lot of rules established about AI. They've got employment terms that are improved in order to, as far as like the number of drafts when they're working in writers' rooms, things like that. And they didn't necessarily get all of the residuals that they were asking for from streaming services. These streaming services notoriously won't let all of the details out as far as how they're actually doing.
Right.
But they still did get some good concessions from that. And I think I think for them, that was a very welcome element to show that there potentially is a door opening on that. And could help in the future, because now they're going to get viewership-based streaming bonuses on releases for the first 90 days of their release. And so they will be getting some of that information so that they know how the stuff's doing and they can get bonuses on that, which is, it's a really great step forward.
The there's a lot there that I want to get into, and we're going to get into the details of it in just a second, as you started to allude to, but I wanted to start with what you were saying about the public relations battle here, because, as you said, I think the writers just did such an incredible job of understanding how to talk to people. I have to imagine some PR departments or PR people for the big studios are not unemployed today, because, like, I mean, the studios are making horrible quotes, everything from the, you know, as you said, we want to starve them out, to the, I think it was Bob Iger who said that all these demands are unrealistic and are just impossible, most of which were then not completely accomplished, as you said, but were done far more than the studios had said they would ever allow. There was that issue of the trees being cut down. You know, there were just all of these things that the studios did that was so easy for the writers to spin as just looking like, you know, the worst of corporatopoly happening out there. And this is all happening at a time when there's been a lot more attention to union and labor. You know, we've seen strikes at Starbucks and Amazon and things like that have garnered a lot of public attention. And it really felt like the studios just did not understand the public sentiment and are, you know, didn't give up everything that they didn't want to give up, but certainly gave up quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely did. And it was really nice to see that they made these concessions. And it was funny because, you know, you had these moments where, like, Zaslav, who is the head of Max right now, he released their, or, you know, what he said was going to be their quarterly losses with all of the stuff going on. And the writers came back and said, that's already more, like, what you're saying that you're losing this quarter is more than what you would have lost had you just agreed with us.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the sort of thing that, like, the writers were able to latch onto so quickly. Like, you could see that Zaslav was probably trying to, you know, get his all of the investors and everything riled up in support of the corporate interests, without realizing that the writers would come back right away and say, you already had a better opportunity than what you just announced if you had just taken this. And that is exactly the sort of thing that these big studio heads just weren't, you know, paying attention to. And it really, you know, I think it really hurt them. And it's interesting to see that these corporate interests were, they just weren't, I don't know. It's almost a surprise that they weren't playing it smarter. You know, it's like they don't really have a clear sense of how things are actually working. And I think that speaks to the way things had been playing for so long, you know, where people had just kind of been going along with the flow, even though it wasn't in their benefit, only to, you know, have something like this happen. And then these studio heads are like, oh crap, I guess people don't really like us that much.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of that, how much do you think the double whammy of it being both the writers and then the actors also going on strike? When SAG-AFTRA went on strike, I think about 6 weeks or so after the writers went on strike, which the contracts for the directors and the writers, the actors are spaced out about a month apart. I think it's somewhat intentional so that they can sometimes support each other like this. How much do you think the actors also going on strike put even more pressure on the companies?
I mean, absolutely a huge factor. You know, they hadn't gone on strike at the same time since 1960. Yeah. So it had been a long time since several of the unions had shown this much support to make these changes. I don't know if the actors would have jumped on it quite so readily if it hadn't been for a lot of these specifics, like, you know, again, streaming services, the fact that streaming services are so kind of conspiratorial and secretive with their numbers. And then the AI thing. And actors have been, you know, long kind of up in arms about kind of the stealing of performances and everything. And I think that those two key things really push the actors to want to join. I can see why the DGA perhaps didn't jump into it. You know, the directors, I don't think are quite as concerned necessarily about the AI. Like, they don't have that necessarily tied up in their elements as much. And they're probably already, because it's a director as opposed to a whole bunch of actors, they likely are, you know, have some better deals with some of the their contracts in the streaming services. I don't know that for sure. I'm just speculating, but after their negotiations, they seemed to kind of concede relatively quickly. But it is, I think, a huge benefit that the actors and writers were all out there striking at the same time, because that also, really reduced the amount of opportunities people had to kind of continue working. I think when we had the 2008 writers' strike, the writers were on strike. They weren't working in the writers' rooms. All of the late night TV shows, like the talk shows and everything, had shut down. But if a film had already been written and had already been greenlit, the production company could still move forward and act. The actors could still promote those projects. And so it made it harder for the writers to get what they wanted. As soon as we turned that corner and the actors also went on strike, suddenly, like, actors couldn't promote any projects that they were a part of if it was related to one of these studios. And all projects pretty much shut down. Like, everybody in Hollywood kind of came to a grinding halt. But again, I think it was really the opinion, or not the opinion, the attitude of the way the studios were behaving that made all of those people who were affected outside of SAG-AFTRA and the WGA, like all of the IATSE members and the Teamsters and everyone else, less in favor of the studios and more inclined to support the writers and actors.
Yeah, I think it's very true, and I certainly think that, if you follow Hollywood closely, if you care about these things, there are probably writers who you pay attention to. But I think for most people who enjoy movies and TV shows, there might be one or two writers' names who are household names, but certainly their faces aren't necessarily ones you see all the time. And I think that so many actors while certainly a number of writers did do very successfully on TikTok, Adam Conover is kind of the one that I think of the most, having all these actors now who were much more recognizable, who did have 4 million followers on their Twitter and their TikTok and things like that, having their I think that fed in really well, because, you already had the writers who were really good at writing the heck out of, one-lines on Twitter and stuff like that to respond to anything the people put into. And then all the actors now being able to be getting a lot more press attention and a lot more, public notice and just better known. It all just kind of came together really well.
Yeah, and I think another thing that worked very well in the favor of the writers and actors is when you had these independent production companies like A24 make deals with them to get exemptions to continue working on projects. And so, like, A24 would work with the unions so that they could say, you know what, we'll keep working. Whatever gets worked out in the end, we will abide by those rules. We just want to keep working on these projects. And that became like a flagship in the scope of how producers, writers, actors, directors, everybody can work together and show respect for the creative work that everyone is putting into the projects in order to deliver stuff that was fair, providing fair compensation for everybody. And I think that was another key thing that not only did it make A24 look really good, but I think it showed to a lot of these people who are outside the Hollywood system, it can work. It's making these bigger companies look that much greedier when you can see it can be effective. Yeah.
No, I think that's really true. Well, so let's talk about the actual details of what happened. As I mentioned, it isn't 100% official yet. So the first step that happened was that an agreement was made. The boards of the two unions voted to, in one case it's a board, in the other case it's a council, WGA East and West, voted to ratify this new deal. And now it's going to the union members themselves. Voting opened, we're recording this on the 3rd of October. Voting opened on the 2nd of October, and I believe closes on the 9th of October. So it is not 100% official yet. But my understanding is at this point, it's so much of a win, and the leadership is so in favor of it. It's pretty much assumed that these are going to pass in the unions, correct?
Correct. Yeah, everybody seems very supportive of it. I mean, everything, when I hear from writers on Twitter, I mean, they're parroting all of the the quotes saying this is an exceptional deal that we're getting here. Like everybody seems very thrilled that they were able to get so much from the AMPTP.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if they had gotten everything that they wanted from their demands, it would have cost the AMPTP $488 million a year. AMPTP came back with a deal. This was back in May. Their deal would have only increased it by $86 million. So it was a huge cut. What they ended up conceding to with the WGA is a deal that essentially gives the WGA members $233 million a year. So they're getting nearly half of what they had asked for, which and what's more important is there are elements in it that allow for I suppose more open doors next time they're negotiating.
Right. And I think that's a huge part of it. And also, as you said, this is harder to quantify, but they also won really big on the artificial intelligence questions. And I wanted to kind of go over that quickly because it gets very complex. And I'll admit, I don't understand all the details because a lot of it's very computer-based. But this is, again, quoting from Variety. First of all, AI can't write or rewrite literary material, and AI-generated material will not be considered source material under this agreement, meaning that AI-generated material can't be used to undermine a writer's credit or separated rights. So what does that mean exactly for what the writers are doing?
I think what they're really pushing at is if you're going to have a creative property, you actually have to hire a human writer to write it. They did provide a concession. And see, there's this line with AI that I think the writers smartly were working with, that AI is a tool, and when used by somebody who knows what they're doing with it, it can help in a lot of great ways. If a writer, and this is part of the concessions, if a writer chooses to use AI to help with their writing, and the company agrees to it, they can do that. But they can't, and this is the key thing that you were just saying, they can't just have a writer submit a script and then the studio can't say, thank you very much, here's your check, go your merry way, and then take that script, plug it into ChatGPT, and say, rework this to, do this, like to make sure we have, we're meeting all of the concessions as far as the number of minority and women characters, or to increase these characters' roles, or you like to really kind of just take the script and have AI make all of those changes. That is completely not allowed, and that's what the writers really didn't want. They don't want the AI to be viewed by the studios as their handy little writing tool in their pocket that they can just have instead of hiring a new writer to do rewrites on a script.
Right. Yes, and I think that's what's really important. The not this article, but another one I read made the comment that this means that we'll not be seeing Siri or IBM Watson getting a Emmy Award nomination anytime. It's going to have to still be the writers, and most importantly, I think, and as one additional thing, the WGA reserves the right to assert that exploitation of writers' materials to train AI is prohibited, and that reserving the right is that so it means that it's also. Because I think one of the things that was hardest about this whole conversation is, and as I think I may have talked about it with you or with someone else on an earlier podcast, in a lot of ways this is kind of similar to when digital music was first happening. And there was all these legal cases about what happens to ownership when it's all digitalized and things like that. And part of the problem is, how do you make laws that or rules that govern technology that doesn't exist yet? Because we're just at the cusp of AI. We have no idea what AI is going to be able to do in 5 years. And to me, the fact that they both won these concessions now, but also have won the right to continue to say in the future, wait a minute, this new thing that no one conceived of when we were writing this agreement is also exploiting the writers in these other ways, that's not okay either.
It is a tricky line, and I think a big part of it is just acknowledging that that it's, I think a hard thing is acknowledging the AI isn't doing it on its own. It's not just this robot that's just sitting there saying, ooh, I'm going to take this script and rework it. It is very specifically greedy AMPTP members, studio heads, who potentially are looking at this as, we'll just say, a tool for ill use, where they would potentially use it to cut the writer out and to just have the AI rework something. And that's, I think, the danger. And I think, as you said, that whole idea of the not allowing writers' material to be exploited by training AI is it's an important line to have in here.
Yeah.
It's also a tricky line because, it's important for the WGA members. My understanding and my reading of it is that it is, I don't know where it stands as far as non-WGA members. And that's where I wonder, because you also hear complaints right now, lawsuits already happening with authors like Stephen King and all of these other authors who have found out that their books have been used to train AI, where
Right.
you could actually potentially have, hey, rework this so it sounds more like Stephen King, like that sort of fear that a lot of these people are having. I don't know where this line in the agreement stands as far as that goes. And so
Right.
I hope that it is something that can be used to keep them from saying, well, I'm just using Stephen King as an example. I know he's an author. I know he's also written screenplays. So for all I know, he is a member of the WGA, but let's just assume for the purpose of this conversation that he isn't. And let's just say, I hope that this still allows them to say,
Right.
we're not going to allow Stephen King's material to be used to rework this AI.
And that one, I think, is probably going to also have a lot of other effects throughout other artist communities. Like I said before, with visual art, there have been some similar concerns, though there isn't really a union of graphic designers and the like. But it's known that there are some AIs where you can say, make me a logo for my business in the style of, Picasso, or I would quote some modern artist, but I don't really know any modern artists. Forgive me. It's not my area of expertise. But, and that, to the point where, as I said, sometimes they reproduce the artist's own signature. And I think that that's, in music, there's also the same kind of thing. Write me a song that sounds like a cross between Paula Abdul and Beyonce, or whatever it might be. And so, I'm going to be very curious to see, you and I are both primarily interested in the film and TV and on-screen media, but I'm going to be very interested to see how do some of the other areas of artistic expression react to this in terms of what are their rules going to be. Like I said, there's no real union for graphic artists, but there certainly are for, music producing and things like that. So it'd be very interesting to see what repercussions this has.
Well, and it goes. I support using AI as a tool for people who are using it to kind of explore things. I think there's a lot that can be gained from these tools and a lot of shortcuts that can really help people get the job that they're trying to do done even faster and provide new things. But yeah, there are going to have to be some things put into place that kind of are dealing with this sort of thing. I think an interesting example of AI used in an artistic way in recent times is the opening credits of Secret Invasion, where they actually, I'm not exactly sure how they did it, but I'm guessing because they knew who the cast was, they knew what the story was based on, they probably were able to use some of the AI tools and incorporate images from the comics, images of Samuel L. Jackson and the other actors and the characters that had already been shown in some of the previous works, and kind of create these very interesting and terrifying images that they use for, I think, very effective opening credits. And I think that's a great example of how artists can use those tools to create something that is very effective for the project that they're doing. But again, it's those lines. Like if they said, let's do all this, but AI, do it in the style of Wes Anderson, and then Wes Anderson spits that out. Like, where's the line that we're crossing with that,
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. Totally agree there. I want to talk just a little bit more about the writer's strike itself and then kind of move on to the actor strike and how these things all tie in. 'Cause I haven't seen any discussion of this. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on this. One of the last things that happened before this settlement but that really drew a lot of attention to the writer's strike again was when Drew Barrymore and then later Jennifer Hudson and one other person whose name escapes me decided that they were going to break the strike and go back to producing their show. And Drew Barrymore
Bill Maher was the third one.
Bill Maher, thank you. She was the first, and so I think she got the most attention and negativity, and she got quite a lot of it, including got disinvited from, I think, presenting at a book awards event and some other things. And both she and then also Hudson and Maher all pretty quickly decided, nope, we apologize. We're going to go back to supporting the strike. Do you think that because there was a very strong sort of public outcry against this, do you think that might have been kind of one of the last straws of the studios seeing like that there was an attempt to, can we, ignore the strike, and it got shut down so quickly that might have been one of the things that pushed them back to the table?
It's entirely possible. I mean, it was a talk show. It was something that all of these were talk shows, and to a certain extent, they were trying to show, maybe we can still come back and do our work. We're not going to be hiring any writers. We're going to just do it just ourselves. And the reaction from everybody, a lot of their own members, really kind of made, I think, the WGA and SAG-AFTRA likely buckle down all the more. I think that the studios, I don't know if this really would have changed the results as to where we landed, but I do think that it was certainly a sign showing the studios that the writers, the actors, they're not backing down. This is incredible solidarity they're showing right now. They, like, these three people who have very different types of shows appealing to very different types of audiences, all ended up conceding right away and saying, that's I don't think that we're going to be able to get past this.
Yeah. So it's definitely a big deal. So one more positive thing there, and I just want to kind of end this part by lifting up that one of the attacks that you saw a lot, and some from people who are just anti-labor, but I think a lot of this was supported by those producers, was look how many millions these big writers make. And certainly that attack is being made on the actors even more so. And I think one thing that's really striking is not only did a lot of these writers who were making tons of money, who have tons of money already, although it's a much smaller percentage than it is of actors, stand up with the strike and often talk about, like, I'm not fighting for me, I'm fighting for everybody else, so that they can become me, or just survive. But that some of them also went to great lengths to support it. And in particular, the one that I know has drawn some media attention that I want to lift up, Drew Carey, you've probably seen him as an actor. He's the host of Price is Right. He was the host of Whose Line Is It Anyway for a while. But he's been a writer as well for quite a while. He wound up at two different restaurants in Hollywood, Bob's Big Boy and Swingers. Apparently, basically, like any member of the WGA could go in and get lunch for free, and I think with their families as well. And he did it throughout the strike. It cost him almost $500,000, which the man makes $12 million a year, so it's not hurting him too much. But it really was an incredible gesture. And I know a number of other writers, Shonda Rhimes especially, also did quite a lot to contribute to, the funds that were helping prevent what the studios said they wanted of starving these writers out.
Yeah, it's important to see that some of these big people, I mean, there were people like him, there were people like George Clooney who was donating funds to the support funds for all the people who are on strike who needed some money, because I mean, we're as people outside of the Hollywood system often seeing all of these big actors in the movies and everything and hearing how much they're making, like $25 million for this movie or whatever. Like, they're making incredible sums of money for the movies that they're participating in. But we're not, these aren't really about those actors. Like, those aren't the people who are striking saying, I want 26 million, not 25 million. It's all these people who are the day players, who are the people who are the actors coming in on just a straight contract who are contributing their own work. And same thing with the writers who are contributing and working on these projects, but aren't the names that we're hearing. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of people involved, and they're just trying to make sure that these studios are not kind of abusing the system to get what they want and to make more money, while all of these people get worse and worse deals. It really has become a very broken system. And so it's been time for a while for something like this to just start getting them into a place where the base agreement, and that's really what this all is just like working on the minimum base agreement is, fair and growing with the times as it should.
Yeah. For those who are fans, both the on-screen stuff, but also of sports, it's been the same kind of question with a lot of the recent sports unions going on strike. The most recent Major League players strike, I know, again, the top players are making huge salaries. And even I think the league minimum in the Major Leagues baseball is several $100,000s. But, they were striking in large part about the minor leagues and what's going to happen with the minor league salaries and stuff like that, as well as the health care for, in the NFL. That was one of the most recent strikes. It wasn't even about salaries. It was about, sure, someone might come up and for 1 year get, league minimum of $400,000. That's more than most Americans are ever going to make. And that's a great salary. But then they're going to suffer a major injury that's going to, have healthcare needs for 50 years. They're not going to play in the NFL anymore, and they don't have any healthcare. So yeah, it just goes around to all this, and it's really heartening, I think, to see those people who are at the top really reaching down and using their power to help. So, And speaking of that, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's interesting that this union, I don't want to say that it has spurred on other unions to do similar things, but I think it's interesting to see these two unions fighting, and then the auto workers are fighting, and there's other unions that are looking to take on these issues because there has been such a shift over the last several decades of kind of corporate interests working to make more profits and not providing those who are actually working to actually get fairly compensated for what they're doing.
Yeah, many, many eons ago, my first career was as a labor organizer, and I'm still connected to a lot of those worlds. And I saw some great analysis coming out of some of that. I was talking about how, the rising tide of kind of like the Amazon strikes and the Starbucks strikes and things like that had gotten a lot of public attention, and that probably helped set the scene for the writers and the actors strike. But then those strikes, which were again like, if your individual Starbucks isn't on strike, it's not going to affect you. You don't interact on a daily basis with the people who are at the Amazon shipping center. You just see it come to your house. But we all watch TV, we all watch movies, and so it's kind of like these strikes were made possible by other labor unions, but also now, they were really just turbo shooting right into the labor union movement and helping to inspire the auto workers. And it's just for lefties like me, it's a great day. Let's talk about the actor strike and how does this affect that? Because it may well be that if the writers had gotten a sweetheart deal and the actors hadn't, the actors would still go on strike. But I think their move to go on strike was the ground was really set for them by the writers. A lot of the actors had already been on the picket lines with some of the writers. Where does this leave the actors now?
I mean, I think it leaves them in a good place, seeing what concessions that the AMPTP ended up giving to the writers. The actors are asking for a lot of similar things. They want the same general wage increase every year so that people are recovering from all the inflation from the previous contract term. They want protection of their images from AI. They don't want to have these deals. I mean, some of these studios have been offering people to come in and say, we want to scan your likeness and then we get to use it forever. It's ours. We can do what we want. And that's just, completely bogus. And so they're trying to cut that. They're wanting to make sure that they're getting the right hair makeup professionals to to help them so they look right, and,
Right.
and whether they're on the principal actors or whether they're background actors, and they're wanting to, again, the whole issue with the streaming services. They want to make sure that they're getting compensated, and a lot of that is goes to these projects that it's designed as a theatrical release. Everybody kind of signs on for it to be a theatrical release, and then it never gets a theatrical release. It goes straight to streaming, and they want to make sure that these studios aren't saying, well, you don't get any residuals because it never had a theatrical release. It's just straight to streaming, and you don't get residuals for that. Whereas they're making all this money because everybody suddenly is jumping onto their streaming services to watch them, and it's just not going to, they don't want that anymore. They want to make sure they're getting the right support into their health and retirement funds. They want to make sure that if they have to be relocated to go somewhere for a project, that it's for like a series or something, that they're getting paid for relocation and all that. So,
Right.
A lot of the similar things, a lot of it more specifically designed for actors, but I think they're probably in a pretty good spot because of what the writers got.
Yeah. I think you did a great job listing all of the concerns there. The only one I wanted to kind of go deeper on was what you mentioned about the hair and makeup. That in particular, that's a real concern for non-white actors, where different kinds of hair can require different kinds of expertise, or just the way light hits different shades of skin and how that shows up on camera. You might have the makeup skills to really expertly make a paler face come out, but someone who's darker skinned, it's a different skill set, or it can be a different kind of skill set. Wanting to have people who have that training as well. So.
Right. Yeah, and the studios have kind of said we'll do this, but just for the principal performers. We're not going to do this for background actors, and that's still something that they're trying to work on. Mm-hmm. So we'll see.
Very much so. Very much so. So have we heard any official news about negotiate? Because last I'd heard negotiate, the studios were still saying they weren't even going to negotiate with the actors union. Has that changed at all? Do you know any updates there?
I don't know if I've heard of any updates as far as where we stand on all of that, but I just think that they're probably in a place right now where I don't know. This is just my guess. They're trying to get everything worked out and locked down with the WGA, and then they'll jump into their hopefully final negotiations with SAG-AFTRA.
Now, one thing that I think a lot of people might be confused about, I know I was somewhat confused about. I think a lot of people, the way they understand labor unions working is that when one union is on strike, the other unions have a commitment not to break the picket. Clearly that's not the case here, because it seems like, the writers are returning to work while the actors are still on strike. How does that work?
I mean, I think that there are elements where they feel things are potentially moving in the right direction. And so I think that they feel a little more comfortable with that. I mean, I was just looking at it. It did say, as of recording, that they actually supposedly met yesterday for bargaining. Good. And so it is possible that things are kind of moving forward. I don't have any update on that, but it is entirely possible that things are definitely moving forward in a positive direction, which is allowing them to kind of, I don't know. I guess that's a good question. Like, why, why are the WGA members allowed to kind of go back and work and not stand in solidarity still? But I guess it speaks to just the state of the system. Like, directors are working, but are they going to be working on something that's actively potentially in right. conflict with what the actors like? Maybe writers will be hired to work on new scripts and new projects, but would they, they're not going to be jumping in to, work on a show that is trying to hire scab actors to come
right.
on board,
Yeah, because there are different phases of the production, so I could totally see that writers are going to work on new stuff, but they're not going to go onto an active set where they say, hey, can you we need a better joke for this line, that kind of thing.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah.
Now, bringing it a little closer to home, I know you and the whole rest of the TruStory FM network, but you and Pete are our grand leaders. That's a terrible phrase. You and Pete are our fearless leaders. And you've been very clear that TruStory is 100% in favor of the strikes and in favor of the strikes and stands with the unions. Where does this leave us now?
Well, I think as far as like people producing content, critics, I mean, they've always said, critics, we're not keeping critics from doing what they want to do. These sorts of podcasts and stuff, we're still through the whole strike, allowed to do stuff unless we felt we wanted to just kind of hold in support of solidarity and everything. We have kind of continued the shows, but we've always been voicing the approach that we support the unions and we would love to see them get through this. And I think a lot of it is just wanting to get to a place where everybody is working again. And, I think a big element that happened last time the writers went on strike in 2008 is it created a huge rise in reality shows where they felt like you didn't need writers. And that, I think, was part of the writers' struggle that time, is that they found ways to create content without them. And it was the unfortunate increase in popularity in shows like The Apprentice that perhaps led to where we are today. Who knows? But regardless, I think that, sure, there have been some of those, but at the same time, I think that the way that the system has shifted so far away from just like cable TV into so many of these streaming services, there still are plenty of reality shows out there.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard anything about this increased rise in that. I just know that there are a lot of projects that have been sitting by the wayside because the writers and actors have all been on strike. So I think what it means for us is perhaps over the next few years, we're going to have some content slow down as we kind of hit the point when those projects would have been released, and all of these projects that kind of got pushed back, we're going to end up having a few years after that. So like the Dune 2 and big projects like that the studios held.
Right, which makes a lot of sense. And I'll say two things there. One, just in terms of the union stuff, I really appreciated that TruStory has always had a position of being very strongly in favor of the unions, but also letting each of us kind of make our own decisions. And in a lot of ways, I think I'm one of the podcasts that is most focused on newly released media within our network. Like a lot of us are looking at kind of older media or different things like that, or you're looking very in depth at one piece of media, like the Minute podcasts. And, as you said, the rules were that, it was one set of rules for critics, one set of rules for content creators, and podcasters had to figure out where we sort of fall. There's an extent to also which, I've always felt that my believing that my podcasts were one of the ones that the unions were caring about was somewhat delusions of grandeur. But, I took the stances that I did, and I will probably continue to not cover struck media. One thing that I'm seeing more and more stuff coming out that the SAG is being very clear that animation that uses voice acting that is not part of the SAG-AFTRA strike, because that voice actors are a different area. So I may go back to start covering some of that stuff now that the writing is unstruck. But I think TruStory has been doing the best thing it can, because this is a really interesting time right now in terms of when they put. It is kind of a side issue, but I think it was really interesting that when they put out those rules, when they said influencers do this, content creators do this, critics do this, a whole bunch of us were like, where do we fall? There's this whole industry that's blossomed of podcasts and, fan art and all this kind of stuff that's sort of where are we all going to fit? So I really appreciate TruStory's stand there. And just on the reality shows, so I only know about this, I have a good friend. Let's call him Bat. And my good friend really likes reality dating shows. And my good friend really got into reality dating shows and follows a lot of the creators. And according to my good friend who follows all of these, one thing that has happened is that reality shows are actually now less and less not that they were ever 100% reality, but there are more and more writers who are working to not write the line by line, but are saying, let's have this conflict, and then let's have the next scene be this conflict and this conflict. And I think that's part of it, is that today, or at least my friend thinks, that today, the part of why we're not going to see another huge influence of reality shows is that they use a lot more writers today than they did when it was first created.
And I think when they were being created, that's always been part of it, but it generally had been the producers who would kind of artificially create stories saying, well, it's more interesting if you're having a conflict with this person. So, try to act that way, and try to kind of push things that direction. And so they would always kind of like be playing puppet master behind the scenes. And it makes sense that inevitably they would hire some writers to help with that. And I think that depending on budgets for the various projects, I think you're going to see it still working both ways. Certainly plenty of them where it's still producers who are kind of playing puppet master behind the scenes, telling the quote actors what to do. But I think at the same time, those that have a little bit of a bigger budget likely have a writers. I don't know if it's necessarily writers' rooms per se, or just writers on board to kind of help craft scenarios that puts them into situations that audiences will be more drawn to.
My understanding is that the friend is me. It's a guilty pleasure, but I love that. And the part of my understanding is that it used to be that they would just put the people together. Episode 1 or 2, they would start seeing what would happen, and then the producers would. But that now today, it's more the writers are saying, okay, we need to get someone who's going to be kind of the jealous, possessive one, and we need to be someone who's going to be the no one expects them to portray someone, but they it's that level of kind of having shifted from in production puppet mastering to let's actually specifically design the puppets in advance. So
yeah. Right.
The ins and outs of reality TV right here for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what they've realized with all of it is it's all entertainment-based content, and they want to do everything they can to make it as entertaining for its audience as possible. And if that means that they have to bring on more people for that, then they will do that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so I think we've kind of covered a lot of the big things. I mentioned the thing about voice acting and animation, and that's kind of a whole separate topic, but I do know that there was an effort, I believe specifically at Warner Brothers DC, which does all the DC animation, which has been really good, especially compared to some of the DC movies, to unionize there, but that otherwise voice acting has still been kind of outside of all of this. Do you know any more about that, or have any more thoughts on kind of where that because as you said, this is kind of a great time for unions to start trying to step up?
I don't know if this is going to push them to try to be more incorporated into unions. I mean, it's the thing with these unions is they cover a lot of different things that actors can potentially be involved in. I mean, it's not just films or TV shows, it's also commercials and video games and animated projects and documentaries and audiobooks, and they cover anything that could potentially have an actor. And so this particular strike may be just working on particular elements within all of these various contracts they have with all sorts of different types of organizations that don't fall under AMPTP.
Yeah.
And so I think what happens, though, when a strike like this changes a lot of the rules, I'd like to think that it's going to help open those doors with all of those other unions and groups that they're working with to look at those rates and say, well, let's see what we can do here to help make that a little more fair on this as well. Yeah.
I know there's definitely an effort right now within the video game industry. Those actors, I believe, are even either trying to organize a strike or talking about something like that. And, to someone of my generation, and Andy, you might feel the same, there's a part of me that, to me, video games, I still think of Pac-Man. And so what do you mean voice actors are going on strike? But if you've, in large part because of the TV show, I wound up playing through the video games of The Last of Us, and the voice acting there is incredible and is a huge part of what makes those games really kind of, the days of it just being press the buttons to make the cool thing happen. A lot of these video games are becoming just new ways of telling powerful narratives with great writing and often great voice acting. So yeah, it's wonderful to see that all these people are being, kind of relegated, are being not relegated, but, being accepted and understood.
Well, and fingers crossed that this helps other groups within Hollywood that aren't covered by unions, like visual effects artists, find ways to build a system that is, whether it's a union or a guild or alliance or whatever it is, that helps them get better, fair working conditions and paid in fair ways based on the amount of work that they're providing. I don't know. That's one group I'm really curious if there will be changes. Like, is the visual effects industry going to have a big push to unionize after these strikes finish?
Yeah. I mean, certainly you talked about how great the effects were at the beginning of Secret Invasion, but I know a lot of graphic artists were really upset about that because, there was the idea of like, was it helping them in their jobs or taking away from their jobs? And so that I could see that being a push to be like, we need a union to at least have some sort of agreement about who's going to get paid when they use the AI like this. So,
well, and that's always a trick. And this is one of those lines with AI that I think speaks to it being a tool. It's like, were there artists complaining when somebody that like when they would do something by hand and then somebody came in who did it in Photoshop and used that tool in Photoshop to create something that the studio liked even better and wanted to use that instead of an art by hand? Like, in some ways, what the AI tool is providing in something like that, it is still an artist who is creating that art. It's just they are using the AI tools to kind of create the art. And so there's such a line with tools and how they can be used. And I think that's part of what the conflict is. And, to a certain extent, I'd say some people are going to need to learn how to use these tools so that they don't end up becoming extinct. But at the same time, I also acknowledge that there need to be some intrinsic understanding of how these tools can grab or what they're being trained with to actually create that stuff. And that's, I think, those are those squishy lines that I think need to be firmed up a little bit.
Right. Yeah. How do you train people so that they're still the ones helping to run these tools? So the tool isn't replacing the job, but certainly a tool, we're not worried about, protecting the jobs of the people who make the very best horse and buggies anymore. It just, technology is going to advance, but you find technology is to advance not to replace workers, but to better support workers. My understanding of this is always kind of shaped by, I had a good friend when I lived in California going to grad school. He was in school for graphic design, and this was like 15 years ago when Pixar was still like the fresh, hot new company in animation, and he got a job at Pixar, and he was so excited. This was going to be the graphics animation, computer job of his dreams, and he was one of the animators on Happy Feet. In that, if I remember correctly, his job was that, like, in all those scenes where there's hundreds and hundreds of penguins dancing, he was in charge of making sure that all of their left feet, like the shot where they turned facing sideways to facing forward, just their left foot. And it was basically, as he described it, an assembly line for 2 years of just someone would give him the frame after the last artist had worked on it. He would make the exact same change he'd made and hand it off to the next artist. And today, a lot of that might be done by computers, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who work in animation talk about is that it's like it's not creative in any way. It's an assembly line, and it feels like working on a factory assembly line in often really awful conditions. So yeah, it's all these things need to be unionized and or at least need to have that possibility and need to have the possibility of the work being treated really well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that speaks to just art in general, because I imagine that you had similar situations in hand-drawn animation with Disney in scenes with, I just trying to think of something with a lot of things, something like the 60s version of 101 Dalmatians, where, Disney, notoriously also not a union fan, but had a lot of different people and just basically, okay, your job is to just basically sketch these puppies. Now your job is to go through and put all the dots on them. And it still is that very much assembly line thing, but it boils down to however it's getting done, doing it in a way that's just fair for the people who are doing it.
Right. Because I think there's going to be assembly lines and that's fine. I think in many ways his concern was he was presented this as a, look, you're not going to get the best working conditions or the best salary, but it's this creative job. And it wasn't. And so it was like, well, if you're going to put me on an assembly line, treat me like an assembly line worker and give me some basic, union ideas. So, well, This has been such a good conversation. Any last things you want to add, Andy, before you start to wrap up?
No, I just think it's exciting to see how things are changing, and it's nice to see so many people in support of making these changes to help these systems shift to provide. It's always going to be a fight between the two sides, but it's nice to see that it's shifting in a way that looks like it's going to be helping people at this point, and it's exciting to see.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I remember when the strike started, and the production companies were being so adamant about holding a line. I was really concerned that they might win, and so seeing that this has gone this way and having similar hopes for the actors, it just feels much better. Well, for your members, please stick around. We're going to have a little bit more. We're going to talk to Andy about some, things we might have been exploring during the strike in terms of non-American productions and things like that, as well as if there's going to be another version of Dr. Horrible. But for those who are not going to stick around, Andy, where can people find more of your work?
Yeah, you can check out all the shows that we do over at TruStory.FM. Entertainment related or non, we've got all sorts of podcasts that we produce over there. Specifically, I am a part of the Next Reel Film Podcast. We're in our 13th season. We've been doing that one since 2011. And each episode we talk about a film, and we do them built-in series. So right now we're looking at the 5 nominees from the 1952 Academy Awards for Best Black and White Cinematography. A lot of really interesting films to talk about in that category. And then also Marvel Movie Minute. You can look at the shows that we've done. We've finished all the films from Phase 1, just having wrapped up the Avengers a few months ago, which is great. So a lot of conversations breaking those movies down 1 minute at a time. Hundreds of episodes to tune in there. Awesome. And then we have another show called Movies We Like, which actually invites a guest from the industry to talk with us about one of their favorite movies. Nice. Recently, we just had Academy Award winner, costume designer Deborah Scott, who did Titanic and the Avatar films and lots of big films. She came on to talk with me about one of her favorite films, which is the 1986 film with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons, The Mission.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I remember seeing that as a kid and really liking it. I haven't seen it since, though, but might definitely try to go back and see it.
Very powerful film.
And, of course, you can find my podcasts on TruStory FM, both this podcast and the Star Wars Universe podcast. You can find all that on the website, which is in the show notes. There you can also find information about how to become a member of this podcast. Membership, it's only $5 a month, and it gets you access to the bonus content, it gets you access to ad-free content, and it helps support this podcast. I love doing this, but it's a lot of work, a lot of love that goes into it. It helps keep the lights on around here. It helps support the whole True Story family of podcasts. But also, I'm no Drew Carey. It's not going to be quite that amount, but we are giving 25% of all the money that comes in as membership directly to the strike funds. We're going to keep doing that, and I will say that is, I have a deal with True Story that they get part of my membership fees, and they're also donating their portion of my membership fees as part of that. So we're all just trying to do our part. If you want to help support the strike, because the strikes are still going on, they may all be over by the time this airs, but still support this podcast, support all of our podcasts by signing on to be a member. And of course, we also love feedback. Send us feedback on Twitter, email, Facebook. One of these days, I'm going to pick which Twitter alternative I'm going to jump ship to. I think it's probably going to be Blue Sky, but kind of want to see a little bit how more things shake out. But if you've got a way you want to talk to us, let us know. And of course, the best way is the Discord. The invitation to our Discord is in the show notes. I love talking to fans there. I'm happy to talk to you there, and you can talk to everyone else in the True Story family of podcasts. But also, if you want us to talk about your comment on air, we'd love to do that too. So on behalf of myself, Andy, thank you so much for listening. We have spoken.